Hello, chess fans. Today I want to look at another amazing player whose career was cut altogether too short. This is Vugar Gashimov. Gashimov was born in 1986, meaning he was only a year younger than myself. In 2012, suffering from health problems that had already been creating issues in his career, he retired, and in 2014 he unfortunately passed away from a brain tumor. There are some fantastic things that have been said about him from Magnus Carlsen and from Gashimov's girlfriend, and I will link those below. They are a testament to the fantastic person that he was. He was an amazingly creative player, very dynamic, very tactical. At his best, he was at the top of the Blitz and Bullets list on sites like ICC, and he got up to number 6 in the world. Personally, I loved watching him play the Benoni because he played it against the very best players in the world, which is risky, but it suited his dynamic style, and I was always inspired by that. I'm going to look in this video at a miniature he played against Gelfand, and I'm also going to post another great miniature he played against Lalich in a separate video. They make a really fantastic pair, and you get to see his style in some really wonderful short attacking games. Gashimov opened the game with e4, and Gelfand responded with the Russian or Petrov game. At one point, this was kind of the Berlin defense of its day, as it's a very sturdy opening, but there are often not a lot of very active possibilities. However, Gashimov does find one of the more active possibilities, the third most popular move in the position, and one that I really don't know a lot about. After d4, Gelfand plays knight takes e4. The beginning of the game is going to be relatively theoretical, so we won't spend too much time on the opening. We'll just mention some of the ideas. After the capture on e5, we get pawn d5, knight d2, challenging the knight, and knight c5. The knight's headed towards e6, where it will sit in a nice blockading square in front of the e-pawn, and it will support the advanced pawn c5, which will give black a nice set of pawns in the middle of the board. Gashimov plays knight to b3 to challenge the knight. The knight does fall back to e6, and Gashimov comes to d4 and challenges it again. It's a little bit of a chase of the knights, knight b3 and then knight to d4, continuing to go for a knight exchange. At this point, it might already have been good to play c5. There was one game that went that way, and black did win it, but it's still an interesting game, certainly. Gelfand does decide to exchange in this position. Knight takes d4, knight takes, and bishop e7, getting ready to castle. All very sensible, of course. Now, after bishop d3, things are getting hairy, and it's probably already good to think about what black should do to improve on the game. At this point, maybe best was to castle immediately when, if knight f5, we can give up the bishop pair in this position and immediately get some counterplay against the pawn on e5. Being castled when white is not gives us a better chance in this position to get rapid counterplay, and black might already be better in this position. However, that is not what happened. Gelfand decided to kick the knight out of d4 first, and the knight hops into f5 with a real threat to capture here on g7 and win a pawn. Of course, you can just eliminate the knight, but then you're giving up the bishop pair early in the game, and even if white's advantage isn't so large, you're definitely worse as black. So Gelfand decides not to do that, and he goes ahead and castles in this position, leaving the knight on f5. Many eloquent things have been said about the power of a knight on f5, and this is a good example of that great and fearsome power. One of the things that makes the knight on f5 so powerful is that it can be sacrificed, and it is now sacrificed with knight takes g7. Really a thunderous and beautiful move. It's only move 11, and a great player like Gelfand is suddenly hit with this big blow. Now, the best move was to decline the knight sacrifice with pawn c4, trying to chase the bishop away and then capture the knight, which is very clever. But this still isn't good enough to give black a good game. The knight can fall back to f5 so that if the bishop is captured, there is queen g4 and a mate is coming on g7. The best move, and this is very much a computer move, is king h8 in this position, getting out of the way of the threat of queen g4 and preparing rook g8 in response. But then after knight takes e7, getting rid of that good bishop and removing the endangered knight, and simply falling back to e2, white has a very big advantage. Black's kingside has been destroyed in this position. while white is in possession of the bishop pair and a much healthier pawn structure in general. So that would have been better, but it would have still been a very, very difficult game ahead for Gelfand. So, fortunately for us, after knight takes g7, Gelfand does accept the knight sacrifice on g7, and we get queen h5 with a massive threat of checkmate here on h7. The rook steps over to h8, the only way to try to defend the h-pawn. Now the bishop comes in with check, the king is forced back to g8. Now, in this position, it might actually look like white's attack has stalled, and if you don't know how to follow up here, that's actually very true. For example, you really want to get the queen to the g file because then you would basically be mating. But it's not possible at the moment because the bishops actually control the key squares. And if you give black a moment, say you castle, then a move like bishop f8 might actually hold the position together, and Gelfand could manage to refute the attack and maybe eventually turn the game in his favor. However, there is a crushing move in this position, and I'd encourage you to pause your video and find it. It's an easy one to miss. So the correct move is pawn to e6. Really, really beautiful. I love this move very much. Now, I would say that if you don't see the ideas coming, it's hard to play this move because you're giving up a critical pawn there that's helping establish a spatial advantage and control of critical squares like f6. So you need very concrete tactical lines. The main point is a zigzag maneuver by the white queen. For example, if bishop takes e6 here, the queen comes to e5, threatening mate on g7 right here, which is huge. And if bishop f6 or bishop f8, we complete our little zigzag that was made possible by e6. The queen comes to g3, and after black blocks, it's either going to be mate or he's losing scads of material. Really a beautiful maneuver. So in some sense, e6 is actually a clearance sacrifice to make e5 available for the queen. So in the game, bishop takes e6 wasn't played. Oh, I should point out one other line. After queen e5, there's also f6 here, trying to get the king away to f7, but then you just take on e6 because the f-pawn's advance leaves e6 hanging, and it's actually checkmate. So after e6, Gelfand tried f takes e6 instead, which is the best available choice, but now it's simple. Queen e6 check, and the bishop is no longer controlling g4. Another idea of e6 is that it's an interference move. After the capture, the bishop is cut off. So the king steps over, but now queen g7 check, and Gelfand resigned in this position on move 16. Of course, when the king steps back, you simply take here, and after the king steps up, I mean, many things win, but easy is to trade queens and then capture h7. You're up an exchange and a pawn. So fantastic little miniature here from Gashimov winning against a great player like Gelfand. I hope you enjoyed the game. If you did, please do like and subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of future videos. And also, I'm going to have a link to another video against Lalich that'll be publishing very, very soon.